Good evening and welcome to our Colloquium series. And I want to give a special welcome to all of you who have joined us now or at some point in the future that are going to watch the video chat and feed. Thank you so much for joining us. But a very special welcome today I want to extend to Dr. Gordon Bietz, who will be our key presenter for tonight. And I want to begin by introducing him. And maybe what I need to share with you is something that inspired me the very first time I met Dr. Bietz myself, and that is in a previous millennium, to be exact, about 25 years ago now, something like that. And the first time I saw him was when I came to Southern Adventist University as a student. And the first picture of the president of the school that I saw was a man in a t-shirt helping people and students move their boxes into the dormitories. And that was not a one-time occurrence. This was a yearly event. And that really set the tone for something that I've appreciated about Dr. Bietz. Since then, I've interacted with him on numerous occasions now in some professional encounters as well. And I've always appreciated that maybe pastoral spirit, the very caring nature that Dr. Bietz has always exemplified. Let me just give you as an audience a couple of the highlights that people always like to share besides this personal note. Dr. Bietz is a graduate from La Sierra and worked as well as Andrews University. And he worked for several years as a pastor and then in Georgia Cumberland Conference as a president of the Georgia Cumberland Conference. And then he became president of Southern Adventist University, as it's now known, and he served there for almost 2 decades as the president of the school. Now he's working as in his retirement, volunteering his time as a director of the Association of Adventist Colleges and Universities. But besides his academic degrees, he's also had some engagement at Harvard University in a Merrill Fellowship, as well as the J.F. Kennedy School of Government. He comes with a really rich background in leadership, and that's what we've been focusing on these last couple of colloquiums, as you probably have recognized by now. We did a book review on the book Biblical Leadership, and then we had a presentation as well on leadership. And so this is the third, our guest lecture that we're including in this series of leadership. And I don't know anybody that's more qualified, because Dr. Bietz brings together so many different aspects, the educational perspective, the administrative side, but primarily also the pastoral perspective. And as a seminary, our leadership programs are tied incredibly closely to leadership within the church. And Dr. Bietz has gone through all of these various levels. And so he has a unique perspective that he can share with us. And we really look forward to your contribution and your willingness to be with us. Several months ago, I wrote an email shooting into the dark and asking Dr. Bietz, would you be willing? And I got an immediate reply, yes, let's make this work. And I really appreciate him getting up early in the morning on the East Coast of the United States to be with us. So thank you so much, Dr. Bietz.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate the opportunity to be in the Philippines for an hour and a half.
That is a real blessing. And Zoom makes that possible. Yes, maybe just 2 more short notes for our listening audience. We will have question and answers, and Dr. Bietz was very adamant that he wanted this to be live. I gave him the option of this being pre-recorded, but he said, no, he wants to interact with you as the live audience. So please write in your questions. If you've joined us on Zoom, then please write in your questions. Start them with a Q or question so that I know how to pick those out from other comments. If you're joining us on our live streams on Facebook or on YouTube, please do the same thing, and we'll be monitoring those feeds and collecting the questions and presenting them to Dr. Bietz at the end of his presentation so that you will get answers to your questions and we can engage on that level. So please, please, please continue to write. I won't interrupt the lecture at all to remind you of this, so just be reminded of this at this point. And finally, a prayer. We're going to be talking about leadership and looking at it from the church perspective. So let's begin with a word of prayer as we dive into this really important topic. Dear Lord, I want to thank you for this opportunity to meet across many different time zones. I want to thank you that Dr. Bietz can be with us at this time and join with us here in the Philippines and around the world, students from around the world that are joining. And I thank you for how you've led him in his ministry for many years in a variety of facets and aspects. And as we listen to his expertise, I want to ask that you bless us and enrich us for our ministry as we continue to serve you. We thank you for this in your name. Amen. Thank you for joining us again, Dr. Bietz. The time is all yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I hope that you can hear adequately, and if there's a challenge, please communicate and we will see if we can fix things. I've been looking forward to this. I visited AS a few years ago when there was a General Conference Committee meeting over in the Philippines, and enjoyed being on the campus there for a brief time. I'm also well acquainted with your president. I'd like to share a screen at the very beginning, and I have a series of slides that we'll go through. Make sure I do this correctly. And so I'm going to be talking about servant leadership, as the title indicated. And the question, of course, is servant leadership really an oxymoron? And I'm sure you folks know what that word means, but to illustrate, oxymoron is rap music. That's an oxymoron, at least to my ears it is. I know it's not to some people. An oxymoron is a working vacation, or an oxymoron is exact estimate, or you might say peace force is an oxymoron, and temporary tax increase is an oxymoron. So servant leadership, excuse me, servant leadership really also seems to be an oxymoron. It seems to be a contradiction. At least it's a contradiction in the context of how we typically envision leadership and how we typically look at leadership. For the quest for power and the desire to be first is not generally found in servanthood. I mean, I always knew that I would be, someday would be a president, because when I was born, my dad was the president of a conference in the United States. Jim and John probably felt like I did at some point, a desire to be lifted up. You know, there is in my heart, that's not readily recognized, and at least not readily acknowledged, a desire for position, for leadership, to be in charge. Not always necessarily to fulfill my gifts at times, but to fulfill my ego. Jim and John had been looking towards fulfilling their goal of leadership. They'd been working on the campaign trail for more than a year. They'd left their families and fishing jobs for 18 months. They were slogging the campaign trail, working to elect their leader, Jesus. They'd been there when he was accused of being a drunkard. They'd been by his side when the Pharisees questioned his parentage. Their point was that they'd been there. They'd been with him in the tough times. And now, as it looked like the campaign was about over, they were seeking a bit of a quid pro quo. That is Latin for we scratched your back, and now you should scratch ours. As we might say in the church, I was invited to preach at a camp meeting to preach, and now it's time for you to give me an invitation to your camp meeting. I gave you an honorarium, and now I think I should get one. It looked like the candidate was going to win. Cabinet posts were being distributed. James and John wanted a good position. They would like family. They belonged to the same tribe. They should be rewarded. And so Mrs. Zebedee comes to Jesus and says, and kneels down in front of him and asks a favor. What is it you want? Jesus asked. She said, well, grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and the other at your left in your kingdom. Right. We want to be in charge. They wanted to be in charge. Right-hand man and left-hand man. Some cabinet posts. Actually, in Matthew's version of the events, it is Jesus. In Mark's version, it is Jesus, James and John's mother. In Mark's version, it's actually James and John themselves that came. But there was some political manipulation going on. They managed to get their mother onto the nominating committee at the constituency meeting. The procession to Jerusalem was looking for all the world like a triumphant march. And James and John were not about ready to be left holding the bag. No, sir. They'd had enough of those small jobs. No more little churches for them. No more running errands for others. No more secretarial work. They were going to be left and right in God's kingdom. Rumors were flying. Jesus would be king. The nominating committee was meeting. The time of their destiny was close at hand. So they got their mother to go to Jesus. Let us sit at your right and your left hand for the glory. The longing of James and John is similar to our longing. In our hearts, we want to be recognized. It's the same longing that Lucifer had, a desire for glory. This is Mark's edition. In James and John, then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, teacher, we want to do you a favor. What's your request? He asked. They replied, when you sit in your glorious throne, we want to sit in places of honor right next to you, one on your right and one on your left. So who else had that kind of desire? Lucifer did. For you said to yourself, I will ascend to heaven and set my throne above God's stars. Excuse me. I will preside on the mountain of the gods, far away in the north. I will climb to the highest heavens and be like the Most High. Isn't that what leadership is all about? Leading, being at the top, controlling, headship, being the chief, being the president, being on top, the primary role, the prominent role. There's a basic desire in fallen human nature that wants to be in control and not controlled, wants to be in charge and not subservient, wants to be leading and not following, wants our own destiny in our own hands. Keith Kent said, the feeling of having no power over people and events is generally unbearable to us, and we feel helpless and miserable. James and John sought positional leadership, leadership to fulfill an inner emptiness, thinking that the bigger the church would satisfy, the higher position would satisfy, being president would satisfy. Positional status, but the hole of personal emptiness is no more filled by position than the lust for riches is filled by a raise. Mrs. Zebedee thought a position would give her and her sons some status. The world seeks status through money, position, and power. James and John were not much different than we are, feeling like a certain position will satisfy. But the ocean is not filled with an eyedropper, and positions don't make a person feel fulfilled or satisfied. It's like, again, you're never rich enough, you're never strong enough, you're never powerful enough. The world teaches us that we have no value unless we compete with others, showing that we're better than they are. And there are winners and there are losers. And we don't want to be on the loser's side. One of the problems is comparisons. Success by comparison. I need to be stronger than, or bigger than, or something than someone else. But remember, when we try to use strength by being strong, or beauty is used by the beautiful, money is used by the rich, brains are used by the smart, we got to remember that we will always find someone who's stronger, more beautiful, has more money and more brains than we do. So if we're always going to be using comparisons in terms of our position in life, we're always going to be losing. Comparisons are odious. Paul says we do not dare to classify or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves. They are not wise. You know, it reminds me of a story. When I became conference president of the Georgia Cumberland Conference, I was elected at a constituency meeting on a Sunday. And the next Sabbath, there was a special event planned, not for me, but a special event planned at a church. And the conference leadership wanted me to attend that particular church event. I think they were dedicating a building or kicking off a campaign of one kind or another. And I was the new conference president. It was my first Sabbath appointment. And I was scheduled to offer the dedication prayer at the Jasper Seventh-day Adventist Church. My wife and I rose early to make the appointment. We made sure that we would arrive early. The church was about an hour away from the home where we lived. We arrived well before 9:30, the Sabbath school time. And my first impression was that the church had not planned for my arrival. I mean, I didn't expect a band, but I did expect someone that would, at least recognize that I was there. Well, a few phone calls later, because the pastor himself didn't seem to know what was going on. A few phone calls later, I became aware of the fact that I had driven to the Jasper, Tennessee church instead of the Jasper, Georgia church. And there were two Jaspers in our conference, and I went to the wrong one. Well, 2 hours later, when we arrived at the Jasper, Georgia church in time for the potluck, much to my embarrassment and the amusement of the congregation, and particularly the conference officers who had invited me to that special service, it was not exactly a good beginning for conference leadership. The following week at the conference office worship on Monday morning, the staff had a great time giving me maps of the conference, telling me where Georgia was and where Tennessee was, and I was the butt of more jokes than I can remember. But it was obvious I didn't come to the conference with all the answers. Comparing myself with others at that point didn't come off very well. The president of the conference doesn't know where all the churches are. So when we are not able, in a sense, to laugh at our own problems, and we always are looking to compare with others and seek to be better than others, well, as Paul says, we're not wise. There's this cartoon. Oh yeah, well, my dad's work cubicle is bigger than your dad's work cubicle. You know, comparisons can happen when you're not a president. Comparisons can happen when you're at whatever level on the pecking order of the business that you're working in. So how did Jesus respond to this request? To sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father. Notice, Jesus doesn't condemn them. He doesn't say James and John are bad for seeking to be leaders. He doesn't say, you selfish disciples, get behind me, Satan. He doesn't say you shouldn't have any position like that. He doesn't criticize their desire for leadership. What does he do? It's the right goal. It's the wrong methodology. He just says to sit at my right and left is not my job. It's not for me to grant. It's not up to me to make that decision. I don't choose the presidents. The nominating committee does that. We have a search committee. It's not me to choose the president of the conference. You know, that might have been the end of the story, except for Twitter and Facebook. Their goal was good. Their methodology was wrong. When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the two brothers. That's Twitter and Facebook. Why were they indignant? Why were the other 10 disciples so unhappy? Well, there are none so as indignant as those who catch someone else doing something they wish they'd have thought of. Why didn't we think of that? Did you hear that James and John asked the vice president if he could appoint them as vice presidents? Can you believe it? I heard James and John got their mother on the nominating committee, and she proposed they be secretary and treasurer of the conference. Of all the arrogance. So Jesus decided that he needed a little session with the disciples, and he called them all together. Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them and their high officials exercise authority over them. Jesus starts out by describing the way it is in the kingdom of the world. In the kingdom of the world, presidents lord it over them. In the kingdom of the world, high officials exercise authority over them. In the kingdom of the world, the president thinks it's his opinion that's more important and more valuable than the vice president's opinion. There are power conflicts everywhere in the world, and unfortunately, there are power conflicts in the church as well. Again, I remember one of the very first meetings I had with the church when I was the new conference president. There was one deacon, we had a meeting in the church and had a long discussion and about an issue that I don't even remember what the issue was. But there was obviously conflict in the church, and that's why the ministerial secretary and I were at the church. And at the end of the meeting, one of the deacons wanted to settle the score with the other church member out in the parking lot by having a fist fight. At another church I visited, the leaders of the church provided me with physical protection because they were concerned about my physical safety because there was so much conflict in the church. The church, the university, the college, our institutions are not exempt from ego-driven desire to have power and control. Jesus says, you know the old way. You know how the rulers how the rulers function, trying to beat out others for position, asking for favors. So you know how it is with them. And you know, I think today about people who have a lot of money, which is in reality an attempt to develop power, because when you have a huge amount of money, you have more power. Why would some chief executive officers of businesses need as much money as they have? Billions and billions of dollars. It seems to be a desire to be more rich than somebody else. After Jesus describes the way the worldly leaders function, he describes his kingdom. Not so with you. You know, you're not going to be like the people in the world. Rather than condemning the two ladder climbing disciples, Jesus told them how to get up the ladder. Whoever wants to be great must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Congratulations, James and John. You want to be left and right? You want to be vice presidents? Fantastic. This is how you do it. This is your strategy. In my world, in my kingdom, this is how it works. Their goal was fine. Their methodology was wrong. So Jesus gives the strategy for leadership in his kingdom. This is the lecture on leadership by Jesus. This is his management style. This is the secret of success in the church. Whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be slave. It's a paradigm shift for leadership. It's turning upside down the normal thinking about positional leadership. This doesn't compute in our human brains when we're accustomed to thinking of climbing the ladder to success, gaining power and control. It is not clear how Jesus' management methodology works. How does being a servant make you great? Will being a servant get your picture on the front page of the Union or paper? How will you get that job unless you do a little politicking? How will being a slave result in you moving up the ladder to leadership success? I'd like you to reflect for a moment on this question. How does being a servant make you great? How does being a slave make you first? And I'd like, if you're on Zoom and could raise your hand and actually share a response to that question, I'd like you to do that. Or even if you just put it in the chat, I'd like you to do that. Respond to this question. Maybe that's not possible.
Let's see here for a second and give people, I do see some of you online, so that's good. If you have an idea, contribute and share.
How does being a servant make you great? How does being a slave make you first?
We have a comment in the section. Those who, Dr. Cruz, did you want to say it yourself? You're here.
Yeah, sure. I could comment it quickly here. Thank you, Doctor, for this very reflective question. Of course, whenever someone serves other, they will be attending some need. And when you attend a need, someone will say thank you. And that feeling of gratitude will create a link between a follower and a leader. And that will be a great relationship. I always tell my children, you know, when they go to a new place, a new college, a new school, whenever you go to a place where you don't know anybody and you want to lead, because as you said, the call to lead is to everyone. It's not wrong to desire to lead, because leading is serving. It's not about power or, abusing or exerting authority without any love to serve. So I tell them, whenever you go to a place where you see any need, anybody needing something, do that action to help someone. And soon you will be leading automatically. It happens automatically. You don't have to say, I want to be a leader. You don't have to put a board saying, I want to be a leader. You just go and help someone. That's it.
You're exactly right. That is exactly right on target. When you fill a need, people recognize you, and you respond to giving other opportunities, giving more opportunities. Very good. I'm going to go back and share screen again. And I'm glad we had some response. I wanted to know I wasn't just talking to myself during this time. So, true leadership. Oswald Sanders has pointed out true leadership is achieved not by reducing men to one's service, but giving oneself in selfless service to them. Then after this leadership lecture of Jesus, he illustrated, Jesus, just as the Son of Man, did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Jesus embodies his theory of leadership. He asks us to be leaders like he was. The same servant leadership principles are in the Old Testament. You remember the story of Moses, his challenge of leading the children of Israel to the promised land. He took them to Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, and when his return from the top of the mountain was delayed, the people demanded Aaron to build golden calf. Moses comes down from the mountain and stops their orgy of worship before the golden calf. And then he says, you have committed a terrible sin, but I'll go back up to the Lord on the mountain. Perhaps I'll be able to obtain forgiveness for your sin. Oh, what a terrible sin these people have committed, he told God. They have made gods of gold for themselves. But now, if you will only forgive their sin, but if not, erase my name from the record you have written. Are you a servant leader like that? I'll have to say that I'm not sure that I am. Would we be willing to lose our salvation to save the people we serve? Would you give up your eternal life for that problem church member? Would you give up your eternal life for the board member who's a thorn in your side? This idea about being a servant leader was not just a singular thought of Jesus, it was the theme of his ministry. After they arrived at Capernaum and settled in the house, Jesus asked his disciples, what were you discussing out on the road? But they didn't answer because they had been arguing about which of them was the greatest. He sat down, called the 12 disciples over to him and said, whoever wants to be first must take last place and be the servant of everyone else. Servant leadership was the life of the Savior. Remember, it's possible to be too big for God to use you, but you're never too small for God to use you. Jesus didn't just preach servant leadership, he lived it. And of course, he died for it. God does want us to be great. He needs presidents. He needs vice presidents. He needs treasurers. He needs secretaries. God does want us to perform great works for the kingdom. But God has his own standards. He came not to show off his worth. He came to give us worth. He came not to enrich himself at our expense. He came to impoverish himself to make us rich. He came not to impress us with his glory. He came to share his glory with us. Successful servant leadership is serving others so they can reach their goals rather than feeding on others so we can reach our goals. How many times do we get friendly with people because of what they can do for us? How many times do we connect with that person on the nominating committee so they have influence over our career? How many times do we reach out to the person who has a lot of money because maybe he could give it to our project? Or have you ever been friendly with a teacher hoping to get a better grade? What does servant leadership look like? The secret of Christian leadership is not at the top of the pyramid, but it's at the bottom. This is simplistic, but I would suggest that there are essentially two approaches to leadership. Leadership in serving or leadership in seeking to control. Excuse me. There's personal dominance approach to leadership, unified, clear direction that's based on the worldview of the leader. There's interpersonal influence. Direction is based on negotiation of differences integrated into the leader's perspective. On the one hand, we have personal dominance. I'm in charge, just do what I say. And if there's a problem, and if something happens and there's a mistake, who's blamed? One person is blamed, the person who said they were in charge. Hopefully there are not pastors or presidents that still function that way. There's the interpersonal influence leadership. You are in charge, but we all have a part to play in influencing the ultimate decision. And if there's a mistake or there's a problem, something goes wrong, there's mutual accountability. I recall making a decision at the Southern Adventist University with my team of cabinet members, and it was the wrong decision and it was a mistake. And I was complaining and kind of taking responsibility for that. And one of my vice presidents said, "We made that decision together. That's not just your fault. It's our fault." So you are together in a relationship and in a decision. Turning the pyramid, the whole idea is to turn the pyramid upside down. Who does the division president serve? The union president. Who does the union president serve? The conference presidents. Who does the conference presidents serve? The departmental directors. Who do the departmental directors serve? The pastors. Who do the pastors serve? The church members. It's all built to provide service to the other people that you are leading. The goal of the leader is to make the person he or she serves successful. The goal is not to use them to show off our success, to put them down so we can feel like we're better than they are. It is to enable them to be successful. When I was president of Southern Adventist University, my objective was to make the vice presidents successful. Their lack of success was not their problem, it was my problem. And if everyone is serving the person that works with them, then it makes a successful organization. The leadership is nothing more or less than influence. John Maxwell said, leadership is influence. The lowest form of that influence is the influence that you have because of a title or position. When I was made president of Southern Adventist University, I had influence because of the position, but it was the lowest form of influence. If your influence depends on the location of your office or the location of your box on the organizational chart, really minimal. Leadership is not only for those who are elected to office, not only those who have positions of authority, is exercised by anyone who influences another. It's exercised by first-year teachers and students. Leadership is influence. And the more people you influence, the more broad your leadership. And the way you influence more people is, as we have said, is by serving them. It's not a position granted by the president or the chairman of the board. It's not the board who empowers you. It's not the title that you have. It's not the power you have. It's the influence developed through servanthood. You know, we have these hierarchies in our organizations. We have the boss, and then we have, is this the person, only person with influence? Is this the only person who has information about how to operate things? Clearly not. All the information to do a job is not located in the brain of the boss. Information for the organization exists in all levels at all. And it needs to be the goal of the leader to use that information and to provide that information, to value every person who has that information. I have a video to show. We're going to see how this works, and we can watch the chat to see if it's not working, but we're going to try it.
Yes, Mr. McAllen's trip to Tokyo is highly beneficial. Yes, I'll tell him. Thank you.
Hello, John Richards. I have an interview with...
Oh, yes, the 2 o'clock with Mr. McAllen. Welcome, Mr. Richards. Mr. McAllen has been looking forward to meeting with you. He's wrapping up a little business and asked me to show you into this room. Mr. McAllen is impressed with your portfolio. Very nice work. Sorry you have to wait. You know how things are.
Sure, no problem. This is ridiculous. Focus. Mr. McAllen, so nice to meet you, sir. As you can see from my resume, I'm tailor-made for the job. Tailor-made. Sir, I am very well suited. Sir, I think my resume speaks for itself. I'm perfect for this job, sir. I've included some financial charts in my portfolio. Kind of show some of the different areas. Hi. Hey, excuse me. I think I'm supposed to be alone here.
You're a little overdressed, though, aren't you?
No, I'm dressed just fine, thank you.
Well, you're going to get those clothes kind of messed up if you're going to help me clean today.
Yeah, you know, I think maybe you're the one who's a little messed up here. Okay, I'm not helping you clean. I have an interview with Mr. McAllen.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, you're not my new assistant?
No, I'm interviewing for vice president.
Oh, well, look, I'm sorry. Don't mind me. I just have to clean up a little bit around here.
Look, you don't know me, okay? But if this interview goes, as I hope it will, you're going to wish you had done what I said. Okay, look, I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling you. Leave.
Can I ask why you're waiting in here?
I'm interviewing for vice president. Wrap up your little vacuum cleaner and get out. Now. And shut the door behind you.
Yes, sir.
Well, Mr. McAllen, I think my record speaks for itself. I believe I had the ability, sir, to keep the important things in focus. Not major on the minors.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. We'll be in contact.
Excuse me, what about my interview?
You've already had your interview, Mr. Richards.
No, I did not. You see, I've just been in that room waiting and waiting. I've yet to speak with Mr. McAllen.
You actually have. That janitor you just spent the last few minutes shouting at?
Yes.
That was Mr. McAllen.
What, the janitor? What, that annoying guy? You know, I've never heard of anything like this.
Leading is more than power, Mr. Richards. If you can successfully lead a company but you can't act with humility toward the least of our employees, you are not the kind of vice president that we are looking for.
You will find that in reality, there are a fair number of job interviews where they set up circumstances like this one was to really see how a person functions in relationship to other people. Providing a leadership in a circumstance is more important than the facts you know. You need to be interested in others and care about others. And I'm going to use Nehemiah as an illustration. Nehemiah, these are going to be leadership principles from the book of Nehemiah. And the first one is the servant leader is interested in others. Hananiah, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. Leadership principles from Nehemiah. The servant leader sincerely cares for people. You know, Nehemiah was living a long ways away from Jerusalem. He had a good job. He didn't need to worry about what was going on in Jerusalem, but he obviously was concerned. The servant leader likes people. There's a quote, if you can't stand the smell of sheep, you shouldn't be a shepherd. And if you can't stand the smell of people, if you can't basically get good relationships with people, then you shouldn't be a leader. If you don't have an honest interest in others, you can't serve them. If you don't love people, you can't serve them. I have a question that I won't ask you to answer or raise your hand, but would you rather be a loving atheist or a hateful Christian? Would you rather be a loving Muslim or a hateful Christian? Would you rather be a loving Catholic or a legalistic Adventist? There's those who've elevated what we believe over how they behave. What is the point of our doctrines if it doesn't make us more loving? What is the point of our teachings if it doesn't help us love our neighbor? What good is the truth if it doesn't make us servants? Andrew Carnegie felt you could develop people the same way you mine for gold. In gold mining, you must literally move tons of dirt to find a single ounce of gold. Looking for the best in people, not looking for mistakes and faults. Accepting people the way they are rather than making it your mission to fix them. Let the Lord do that. The problem in the early church, and I've skipped this quote, however, you don't look for dirt, you look for gold. You look for gold in people. Ellen White says the early Christians began to look for defects in one another, dwelling upon mistakes, giving place to unkind criticism. They lost sight of the Savior and of the great love he had revealed for sinners. They became more strict in regard to outward ceremonies, more particular about the theory of faith, and more severe in their criticism. Isn't that amazing? When they looked for defects, they went to church more often. They went to prayer meeting more regularly. They argued more about theology when they were looking for defects rather than loving and looking for good things. There's a leadership style that seeks to force obedience. It can even be a well-intentioned attempt to manipulate for Jesus. Too often we seek to mold people's opinions without melting them with love. So first, the servant leader from Nehemiah is interested in and loves people. And second, the servant leader is empathetic. They said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province and are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and its gates have been burned with fire. What is your response to problems, particularly when they're not problems that you had anything to do with? If they're problems in a different school, a different class, problems with a different teacher at a different church, what is our response to problems? You know what the tendency is? I'm glad that's not my problem, rather than empathy and caring about other people. The response of some is relief. I'm glad it isn't my problem. Assign blame. The walls are broken down. I wonder whose fault that was. Satisfaction. It looks like they finally got what was coming to them. Pride. We're better than they are. We don't have those problems. Have you ever been happy with someone else's downfall, particularly if you didn't like that person? That's not empathetic. Nehemiah's response was, when I heard, for some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. He cried when he heard of a problem a long ways away. The servant leadership is experienced like as a family. You don't sense others as being above them. You don't feel as being ahead of them. It's like being an exposed nerve ending. What is the response of the body to injury? What happens when you hit your thumb? Blood sends the resources to fix the pain. The church is like the body. The church responds to injury, to people in sin, with love and care and empathy, not with punishment. And the third thing, the servant leader identifies with problems. Then I said, O Lord God of heaven, the great and awesome God who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him and obey his commands, let your ear be attentive and your eyes open to hear the prayer your servant is praying before you day and night. For your servants, the people of Israel, I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's house, have committed against you. Was it Nehemiah's problem? Why does he confess? He had a good job, he lived well. Why should he worry about, is this his problem? But he confesses the sin himself. He's a part of the problem. He's a part of the body. He's a part of the family of God. He's a part of the tribe of Israel. It is his problem. Imagine for a moment we're in a boat together. We're rowing across the lake. Suddenly I look over and I see a hole in your end of the boat. And what do I say? What is my response? You have a problem. Is that true? Yeah, the other person has a problem, that's true. But no, it's we have a problem. The hole may be under the other person in the boat, but the problem, we're all on this boat together. And believe me, in our church, in our community, we are in the boat together. And we need to relate to those problems as Nehemiah did. The Ritz-Carlton training manual said, if you see a problem, what? You own it. The servant leader in the family of God sees a problem in the body. They say, we have an illness, we have a problem. Servant leaders identify with problems to provide solutions. It wasn't an assignment from the king. They didn't elect him in Jerusalem. He had the gifts. He exercised them. He was a servant to his people. It isn't enough to be interested. It's not enough to be empathetic. It's not enough to identify. Servant leadership takes responsibility. Doesn't seek to assign blame like Adam and Eve did in having lawsuits to each other. The servant leader is also available. Oh Lord, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of this your servant and to the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. Nehemiah was willing to be a part of the solution. A servant leader is available. He stuck his neck out. You know, the king could have cut off his neck, could have cut off his head, but he went to the king to figure out how to solve this problem. And the servant leader has a plan. I also said to the king, if it please the king, may I have letters to the governor of Trans-Euphrates so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. Opportunity knocks to those who have a plan. To fail to plan is to fail to plan is to plan to fail. So that Nehemiah had empathy, he identified, he had a plan, and he said he wanted the, I'll continue to read. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel by the temple, for I will need a resident to occupy. He had a plan to move forward. Like I said, when you don't know what harbor you're headed to, any wind is a good wind. If you don't know what harbor you're headed to, any wind is a good wind. So you have a plan. Leadership has a vision, a plan. And I arose at night and had some few men with me, neither told any man what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem. His vision statement is interesting. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we're in? Jerusalem lies in ruins, its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. This is a vision statement of Nehemiah. The problem, Jerusalem lies in ruins, its gates have been burned with fire. The solution, come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and the result, we will no longer be in disgrace. So Nehemiah had a plan to resolve things. Vision motivates. There's extrinsic motivation that I think many leaders attempt. Do this and I will pay you. There's intrinsic motivation, scratching where people itch on the inside. They replied, let's start rebuilding. He cast a vision and the people responded. So they rebuilt the wall. I remember a time when, again, I hearken when I was president of Southern Adventist University. I came to work one morning at 8 in the morning and I looked and there were some people there that looked kind of tired. I said, what have you guys been doing here? They who had been working all night to fix a computer problem. Now, extrinsic motivation did not cause them to work all night to solve a problem. They were committed to the vision of the university, and they knew that their work was important to the university, and they worked all night to do it. Not because they were being paid by the hour, not because anybody was going to double anything, but because they believed in where the university was going. Churchill had a vision. I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. The vision of a leader touches the needs of the people they're leading. Churchill's vision doesn't look too optimistic, but it galvanized the people. Right now, we see this kind of leadership in the Ukraine. Their leader didn't run and hide in some other country. He rallied everyone to a vision for victory. Now, they may not arrive with that victory. The final story hasn't been written yet, but there's a person who is essentially using Churchill's words, but is inspiring people to work. Servant leaders listen. This is also from Nehemiah. Now the men and the wives raised a great outcry against their Jewish brothers. Some were saying, we and our sons and daughters are numerous, and in order for us to eat and stay alive, we must get grain. Others were saying, we're mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our homes to get grain during the famine. Still others were saying other things, and the leader begins by listening. Robert Taylor, Dean of the University of Louisville School of Business, explains the servant leader today doesn't have the answers, he has questions. The people working with the customers are the ones with the answers. And that harkens all the way back to what we said about the pyramid. The people who are serving across the institution are the ones with the answers. The person sitting in that office in the top floor with all the windows is not the one with all the answers. I remember going to Southern Adventist University on my first day as president. I saw my name on the door, president of Southern Adventist University, and I said, oh my goodness, what have I done? I have no idea what I'm going to do here. I don't know how to run a university. So what was the result of my ignorance, my lack of knowledge? I depended on the people around me, and they were strong, and we became strong together because we worked together, not because I had all the answers on how everybody should do their things. We won't listen to others if we think we have all the answers. We won't really care what others have to say. We have our minds made up. People know if you're listening or just being polite. They sense whether you value them or not. Servant leaders listen. The value of ignorance. This is a quote from Peter Drucker. I was not an, oh, this is not a quote from Peter Drucker. This is the illustration I already told you. When I became president, the greatest thing I brought to the presidency was my ignorance. I was not an expert in higher education. I remember walking into the Wright Hall the first day of the job, walking down the hall and seeing my name on the door, thinking, what have I gotten myself into? I don't have a clue about how to do this job. I'd been a pastor for 26 years, conference president for 3, and knew little or nothing about the unique challenges of higher education. Leadership is not derived from being the one with all the answers. Rather, it springs from their ability to listen to those who have the answers and to give them expression, to give expression of the corporate reality, to paint a picture of the corporate goals, to project a vision. This is now the Peter Drucker quote. Knowledge and experience at all about the industry or business I am evaluating. I bring my ignorance to the situation. Ignorance is the most important component for helping others to solve any problem in any industry. Ignorance is not such a bad thing if one knows how to use it, and all managers must learn how to do this. You must frequently approach problems with your ignorance, not what you think you know from past experience, because not infrequently what you think you know is wrong. So don't feel when you are thrust into a leadership position, or even when you're choosing a person to be a leader, that you need to choose someone who has all the answers. You need to choose someone who knows how to ask the questions. You need to choose someone who knows how to work with people. You need to choose someone who knows how to love people and who knows how to bring people together by sharing empathy with them. Remember the story that we began with? Jesus called them together. You know, the rulers of the Gentiles lorded over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Jesus continues, not so with you. Whoever becomes great must be your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Jesus illustrates the leadership of servanthood, just as the Son of Man did not come to serve, come to be served, but to serve and to give his life. So Jesus gave his life for us. And so we have to be willing to give our lives for each other. And that sometimes means not using your ego and not playing to your ego, but playing to what it really means to love people. And so that's the end of the lecture, and it's, what is it here? It's 7:13. What is it there?
Here it's 8:14.
8:15.
But thank you. Thank you for your lecture and your presentation on a very challenging and important topic. And thank you for sharing some personal experiences as well.
Anybody have any questions or observations?
We do have a couple of questions that I've been collecting, but this is also just another appeal. Write up your questions, and let's transition into this time of questions and answers. And I'm sure we're going to prod some of this even more as we go along. The first question is one on semantics. So maybe we can start with a semantical question. And that question is, I've always had trouble with the term servant leadership because growing up in Asia, the servants I knew were not leaders. So is it better to talk about a serving leader rather than servant leadership?
Yeah, that is probably a question of semantics. It is true that I have not grown up in an era where people were servants in a sense, and so I have a different picture, I suppose, in my mind. But I do think that an actual servant in the environment that you're in, probably you knew some of them that did provide leadership, that did influence. Again, leadership is influence. Servants, even in a environment where the culture does not see them in a positive light, I can imagine that even in that environment, there are some servants who have actually demonstrated significant leadership to their communities.
Part of it might actually be then perception or something like that. How we see people engage, and maybe in societies that sometimes works differently. So thank you for that response. On that Asian context, there was another question. So this was the first question. A second question. Many of IS students come from societies with strong hierarchical structures. Many believe servant leadership gives a negative impression about our church organization in their cultural context. What is your advice to leaders who are afraid of leading as servants in contexts where they're expected to seat on a throne and reign? Is it really possible to be a servant leader and have a powerful influence anywhere, anytime?
Well, look at Jesus and the disciples. What kind of community was that? With the Pharisees and scribes, with the Romans. You know, he exercised servant leadership, and he did not. He was in a society that certainly was not oriented towards servant leadership. I think it's more a mindset, and possibly using the word servant is not maybe a good word to use. Maybe you need to develop a different word in talking about it to other people in your community. But I think that the philosophy of it is loving and caring for people and uplifting other people instead of yourselves. In a very dogmatic and top-down organizational structure, wherever you are in that structure, you can do your best to serve those who are around you. And if you are the, quote, top dog in that structure, you can still live like and exercise the empathetic, loving servant leadership that is not typical maybe in that structure. And I know there are people probably, I'll use another personal illustration. I came to Southern Adventist University having been a pastor and a conference president. And at our first faculty meeting, well, it wasn't a faculty meeting, it was a Senate meeting, which all the faculty leadership was there. One of the faculty members raised his hand and said, "So what's your vision for Southern Adventist University?" My vision? I didn't have a vision. I said, "You have the vision. what's your vision? You're the ones who live here. You're the ones who teach here. You're the ones who work here. Let's work together and build a vision for Southern Adventist University, rather than me coming and just saying, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to do next week. And here's what we're going to do next week. And you're all going to follow me. The reality is half the people probably wouldn't follow. And so if you think you're the leader, turn around. If nobody's following, you're not leading. And I think the best way to get people to follow is to influence them by loving them, caring for them, serving them. The illustration that was mentioned in my introduction of carrying boxes in for students at the beginning of the school year, that was the most fun I had, I think, being president, because people didn't know necessarily who I was. I was dressed in a t-shirt, and I'd go to the door, and there was one person, parent, who wanted to pay me for helping carry the boxes to the dorm room. Another person, would ask who I was and what did my work? And I said, I'm the president. You're what? They couldn't envision that, but I was living like a servant. And I think that story has spread wide and far, as illustrated by the fact it was used in my introduction, simply because I spent one day every summer, almost every summer, cleaning toilets and working with the people at the college that cleaned the rooms, simply illustrating the fact that nothing's beneath me. I'm able to do anything on this campus. Everybody's important. And that also communicated how you behave, communicates your servanthood, not necessarily what your position is. I'm sorry, I had a frog in my throat all morning.
No worries. Thank you so much. Maybe I'll just intervene with my own question. I know there are some more questions, so we'll get to those. And just follow up on this. What is your personal experience balancing out positions of honor with this model of servant leadership? And just as a context, and you're probably well aware of this, if I travel as a professor or for any event, when I reach a destination, there are big banners with my picture on it here in the Philippines. I am told to sit at a separate table for the food that are prepared. Everybody's in one room, but because I'm the honored guest, I sit by myself at a more elaborately festive table. And in some ways, it actually feels more remote. And I'd rather be with my students or with the community that is in the other room. And yet I would be disgracing the host by. So how do you deal with these moments where there is you and your capacity as president, dignified moments or moments of these, the honorary person versus moments of servanthood? So I wanted to pick your brain on a practical, personal level about that.
Well, I'd say two things. One is it's fairly easy for some of that to go to your head too, isn't it? It makes you think that you're really more important than you really are. And the other thing is, obviously, I haven't lived in that kind of culture, and I think you need to be empathetic and understanding of what that culture is requiring and what they need. And I certainly wouldn't refuse to accept their approach to hospitality. I think that would be inappropriate. So you need to be across the board. It's being sensitive to the needs of the people that are there. Now, if you end up living there and you end up being there a longer period of time and the people get to know you, then I think that can change a little bit over time, but certainly initially you would need to accept what they consider to be the appropriate way to treat an honored guest. But hoping it doesn't go to your head in the process.
Thank you for that answer. Maybe some more some questions about the content of your lecture as well. You had illustrated and said in your top-down pyramid that a division president serves the union president, the conference president, pastors, and so on. As a president of a university, is your realm of influence serving the faculty, or is it serving the cabinet or the vice presidents, or is it serving the students, or is it all of the? How can you elaborate a little more on the pyramid? Is it just the next level, or is it all of the above? How do you see that pyramid, and how did you experience that in your various functions as a conference president, as a pastor, as a educational president?
Well, certainly it's all of the above. I mean, it's not just that the person that are the people that are your direct reports that you meet with on a weekly basis that are the prime ones, I suppose, that you would seek to make successful. But in terms of serving the students, of course, that was one of the things I think that I was well known for at Southern Adventist University, is that I would connect with the students and I would relate with the students. When I was just trying to think, you want to make the people that are your direct reports successful, and that's a little bit of a different twist than the general attitude of service across the entire organization. I think you want the people in the organization to perceive you not as a top-down dictator, but as a person who's open to being influenced by all the people at the institution, which means listening to what they have to say and being caring about what they have to say. I had a faculty member come to my office with his wife, maybe it wasn't his wife, maybe it was somebody else. And it was a process of firing him. He knew that he was going to be fired when he came into my office. And he came into the office and he said, I don't like being terminated, but I'm sure glad it's you that has to fire me. And so the reality was I was communicating my pastoral care for everyone. And I felt that way towards all the employees, and I think that they were aware of that, even when I had to make some very hard decisions and separate some people from employment.
There were all kinds of, I'm trying to think of which question I should pursue, because you mentioned in your response a lot of different things that others have asked and that we can explore with just a little further. Let me go to this question to come back to the pyramid. Here's a question from our Zoom meeting. According to the Bible, in heaven there's a hierarchy: archangel, the cherubim, the seraphim, regular angels, principalities, thrones, virtues, powers. Is this hierarchy organized as a top-down power, or is it a different structure from what we know and practice? So maybe to expand in general, does the Bible have a top-down hierarchy or a bottom-up hierarchy, and how do you perceive that?
There's no question, but there are different positions that people need to occupy. I was always, when I was on the campus, I was always the president, and I was the top dog, so to speak. And so I'm not talking about the fact that we eliminate these hierarchical structures. I think those are vital for the operation of the organization. Everybody can't do everything that everybody else needs to do. You need somebody who's eventually in charge, but how are you in charge? Is it a dictator where you have all the answers, as I expressed in my program? Or are you bringing people's ideas together, developing consensus, and making sure everybody feels like they are a part of the organization. So clearly, heaven and earth and colleges and churches all have organizational structure that is perfectly appropriate. But I don't think that what I'm talking about primarily is the attitude that you take in approaching that structure.
Okay. The attitude is the important aspect. Thank you. Maybe one more question related to this biblical worldview and perspective. In some ways, we have this interesting element of a multiplicity of 12 tribes, for example, not a single tribe with a subset of tribes, but a 12 tribes. And then in the New Testament, we have 12 disciples, 12 apostles. There's not a hierarchy within them. So there's quite a large group, actually. We do have images of a singular person leading, that would be the monarchy, though usually not in a positive light. Do we follow more of a political system where one person is kind of the boss, and then is attitude sufficient, or should we look more towards these models of the tribal system of the Israelites versus or the New Testament of a multiplicity of people versus an individual top dog, a president, or is there some value in that?
I'm not sure exactly what the question is. I do feel that there's the body of Christ, the church. I mean, when I was the pastor of the Collegedale Church, we had 2,000 members, and somebody has to provide leadership. But the leadership that I feel like I provided grew from the people that I was leading. It did not grow from some book where I felt like I had the answers for everything that needed to happen in the church. And I would always try to bring together a group of people that had a vision or develop a vision for the church that would be presented to the church in business session and so forth. And the same thing even at the college and the university. I had a particular idea about where we should build a student center at the university. And I was very strong in that opinion. And I had that opinion for quite a while until a vice president and one of the other people came to me and explained why it would be better for us to do something else and to put the student center in a different location. And I conceded that they had some wisdom, and at the end of the day, that changed my particular perspective. So I mean, it's about being able to not only to influence others, but to be influenced by others.
Mm-hmm.
And to care about what their opinions are. People know if you care about their opinion and if you actually listen. I think listening is another thing we didn't talk about very much, but it was one of the points that Nehemiah made. He listened to those people that were complaining and then went about developing a mechanism to fix that problem.
In the title, you had this interpersonal relationship as a model, and listening is certainly part of relationships. How do we recognize as leaders reality if you only hear what people want you to hear?
Your sound broke up for a second.
Oh, sorry about that. Let me try again. How do you recognize reality if you only hear what people want you to hear as a leader?
If you only hear what you wanted to hear?
What people want you to hear.
What people wanted to hear. Yeah, there comes a time, doesn't there, when all the people are wrong, and when you need to provide clear, definitive direction, I would be very careful about making that decision. I think there's a lot of wisdom in the community. And so it's not very often that I would take a path that would be totally contrary to what the community was interested in. Now, obviously, you know, Jesus took a very strong position against the scribes and Pharisees. And as a servant leader, he still kicked the money changers out of the temple. So there comes a time, certainly, to stand for the right, though the heavens fall. But I would be very careful before I made that kind of decision, and I do it with a lot of consultation with people that I had a lot of confidence in.
Thank you very much. Another question from our Facebook group here. How would you advise a leader who practices negative reinforcement? Is it okay to dwell with that kind of reinforcement or to encourage the members by using negative reinforcement?
Define negative reinforcement.
Since it's from somebody in the chat, I can't personally answer that question. So I'll let you fill that in however you want to, or maybe define how you would define it and then take it from there.
Negative reinforcement. I'm sorry, I'm too positive a person to even know how to define negative reinforcement. I don't know how to define that.
Okay, so the important thing for a leader is to maintain positive reinforcement. I guess that would.
Well, yeah, that brings up another personal illustration. I had one of the vice presidents brought me a game, and you know the game title was Pollyanna, and I basically, and I don't know, you're not acquainted with the movie about Pollyanna, but it's a movie apparently where there's this person that's eternally optimistic. I think it's very important for a leader to be optimistic and positive and not dwelling on negative things. There's a lot of negative things that happen, and you can always cry, oh me, things are tough here. But I think leadership requires positivity.
Okay, thank you so much. Another question from the Facebook feed. How does an HR identify qualities in a candidate before choosing the candidate for leadership?
Were you guys able to watch the video that I showed?
Yes, we were able to see that. So I think it's actually in response to that. So
yeah, well, I think that's one interesting way to not just interview somebody, but do an awful lot of background checks with people who know the people. And I've even heard of circumstances where they actually set up a scene when the person comes in to be interviewed to see how they would respond. So I know I've made some mistakes in hiring. And I think one of the mistakes I can think about is when we depended more on the HR tests. You know, there's all these tests you can give somebody. Test and said, wow, this person really looks like they're great. And I didn't do much discussion or have any conversations with the people that worked with that person in the past. And if I would have, I don't think we would have hired that person. And so I think there's a lot of background checks that need to go beyond the formal testing, but need to actually be communicating with others who've worked with that person and communicating confidentially with them.
Maybe a follow-up to that, how is it possible to get honest feedback from the people that you work with rather than glorified or I guess you mentioned the one leader in the current war you were referencing, the Ukraine. The opposite example would be what appears to be in Russia, where there's not a good communication, and then people just feed what they think the leader wants to hear.
I think it's by being vulnerable. I think a leader needs to be vulnerable and to share his vulnerabilities and to share his problems and his difficulties and to share the fact that he's not God's gift to mankind, and that vulnerability frees people to be open with him and or her, and to be willing to talk in an open way with him or her. I'm getting all these phone calls I'm having to hang up on. So we've gone for probably an hour and a half or 90 minutes. We probably ought to come close to winding these up.
I'll finish with the last question that kind of allows you to kind of summarize some key things maybe in a practical way. How can we have this servant leadership spirit and eliminate the bossy leadership attitude?
Spend a lot of time with Jesus and note how he related to people, and I think I back up just a little bit, and I think the vulnerability is very important. You can't be very bossy and in charge when you fully recognize your imperfections. When you personally understand that you're not everything that other people may think you are. It's pretty hard to come down in an authoritarian way when you realize that we are all broken people. One of our division presidents, the last division presidents, would say that in his sermons when he got up. We're all broken. You know, I'm a broken person. I'm a broken leader. I have challenges. I have difficulties. And when that recognition comes to yourself and to the people that you serve, then you don't come across as a authoritarian, know-it-all kind of person, I think.
Thank you so much for sharing from your personal experience and the many years that you have served. We really have appreciated the time with you. And if we may ask, would you be willing to close with the word of prayer, our time? And thank you for taking the time to answer our questions as well.
Be happy to. Eternal Father in heaven, we thank you for giving us Jesus and for his demonstration of how to live. We know that we fall short every day and it's difficult, but we also know that we have grace, and that knowing Jesus extends his grace to us. Help us to be influencers. Help us all to be leadership influencers, influencing those around us and those that know us in the way of the cross. And I'd ask your blessing on each one of these individuals and the studies they're doing and the work they're preparing for. Give them wisdom in the name of your Son. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who joined us. I know that we've had people from around the world. Some have joined from South America, from Africa, from around this territory, from Indonesia, from the Philippines. So thank you all for joining. I know that you were blessed, and thank you so much, Dr. Bietz, for sharing your experience and wisdom with you. Blessings to you and your day and your ministry that you continue to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right. Thank you, Eike. Good night, everyone.
Right.
Do you want to receive advanced training in missiology or intercultural studies? Do you want to develop advanced mission research and training skills or enhance your mission leadership and cultural sensitivity? Maybe you want to become a teacher or a professor of mission and related subjects. Or you just want to pursue a doctoral degree but you cannot do it full-time. Well, IS has the ideal doctoral degree program for you. It's called the Doctor of Missiology or Doctor of Intercultural Studies. What's so special about this program? Well, the Doctor of Missiology or Doctor of Intercultural Studies is a professional doctoral level missiological degree that is designed to equip pastors, mission leaders, teachers, administrators, and other ministry practitioners with advanced cross-cultural mission skills. It aims to form culturally sensitive leaders to enhance their ability to pursue the mission of the church. And it's an in-ministry program which allows people who are in full-time ministry or who are in full-time work to take time for classes during their vacation time. Now, this program aims to develop leaders and researchers in the area of missiology. It also aims to develop the spirit of inquiry, critical thinking, analysis, and synthesis within the context of Adventist identity and mission. It also prepares mentors who will contribute significantly to the advancement of the church mission in diverse and challenging contexts. So, if you have a master's degree in religion or its equivalent, and if you have at least 3 years of full-time cross-cultural ministry experience, you are qualified for this doctoral degree program.
My name is Bongani Ndlovu from Zimbabwe in Africa. As a DMIS student here at IAS, my academic journey has been a very fulfilling experience. The church is now scratching where it's itching, reviving the focus on mission and empowering the practitioners on the ground. I have personally been enriched in doing mission and in understanding why do mission and how to be effective in reaching the contemporary society and world religions with the gospel of Christ. This program is life-changing. I commend the church leadership and the church is encouraged to put more effort in empowering members and pastors in mission.
It's been a wonderful experience to be part of Doctor of Missiology program at IAS. I had the privilege of learning not only from our professors, but also from among my classmates who come from different backgrounds and different nationalities. To be part of this program is enriching. While I am working full-time, I get to study at the same time. So I get to apply right away what I learned from the academia.
I'm a student at IAS. I do the doctoral program for the Doctor of Missiology. I am thrilled to be part of this program. The professors and the student colleagues are from all over the world, very diverse. The professors push you to learn, but they walk alongside you. I have not been to IAS yet, but when I go, I hope to find a vibrant, faithful, and more Eastern group of Seventh-day Adventists.
Hello everybody, good to be here. All I can say is that it's easy for me to recommend IAS DMIS program. As a frontline worker down to the ground, I can tell you that it has helped me a lot in doing mission and how I see the world around me. So I would highly recommend this to you. If you have a chance, come to IAS and be part of this life-changing experience. God be with you.
For more information about this missiological degree program, you may visit the IAS website.